Thank you all for being here at 3:30 after a full day. I thought maybe we could just go back to the conversation about capitalism from the morning instead of for those that were here. That was intense. That was a big morning. So we're going to spend this half an hour talking about trauma and talking about the intersection of meditation, mindfulness, and traumatic stress. And my goal for this session for all of you in the different ways that you're offering mindfulness, even in the workplace, your clinicians, my goal is that you leave this conversation feeling more empowered than afraid. Because I've had this conversation where people will come up to me after a talk and they'll go, can I still offer mindfulness practices? And I want you to know my goal here is to have you feel more confident. You have a more complex toolkit that you're working with. So that's my goal. If I don't reach that goal, please don't tell me until tonight. So yeah, thank you. So because where we are in the day, I know it's been a big day, a lot of content. So why don't we start with some practice? Why don't we do 25 minutes of practice? Does that work? Yeah, we'll do a couple minutes of practice. So I just want to invite you to drop in here, drop your attention in. We'll be here for about 2 minutes. This is an optional practice, so you can follow my instructions or do something completely different. My invitation here is to take a couple of deeper breaths. If any movement would be supportive for you, you're welcome to do that as well. But just a couple of breaths to fully arrive as we enter into a conversation that takes us into the deeper waters. And then an invitation here is to notice your energy level. So you could imagine if this was a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of your energy. Just noticing, where are you right now at this point in the day? And then you could also notice what told you that that was your energy level. Maybe it was sensations, or it could be the absence of sensation. It could also be the narrative that's here of a stream of thoughts. And then I'm going to invite you one more layer, which is to notice your mood right now. What is your mood? And then same thing, what told you that that was your mood? Maybe it was sensations, thoughts, a familiar state of being. And then just note that. We're not trying to change it. And if you like, for this last part of the practice, you could even take a half step further into the mood, deepening into whatever your state is, no judgment, bringing your mindful awareness to this state. And of course, it will change. And again, just acknowledging that internally, knowing what your mood is. And then in the next few breaths, I'm going to invite us all to shift here. So in any way that would help you make a shift, whether it's a little bit of movement, a couple deeper breaths, maybe some form of making contact with yourself, like hand on heart, just feeling your hands together. And then whenever you're ready, I'll invite you to bring your attention here, or if you'd like to stay where you are, that's also fine. But I'm going to start sharing some things in the next few seconds. Thanks all. So the reason that I wanted to do that practice, and given that we only have a half an hour together, I'm just going to go right for the headline up front of what I'm going to be talking about, which you all already know, which is that it's a really big deal to ask people to pay attention. That's all. You all know that on some level. It is a very powerful act to ask people to shift their attention from thinking down into feeling. And what I'm going to be talking to you about in this session is that's especially true when it comes to trauma. Yeah. For people that are struggling with symptoms of traumatic stress, which we'll talk about more in a moment what I mean by trauma, that ask of asking someone, hey, I'd like you to shift your attention down into the body, what we'll talk about as interoceptive sensations, but to come down into the body and notice your mood and notice what's all happening down here is a really powerful thing to do. And it can actually be dysregulating for someone who's experiencing trauma. So I want you to just imagine this for a moment. Imagine you're someone, this might be true for you, with full respect. You're someone who's struggling with traumatic symptoms. That can mean a number of things. That could mean something like you experience flashbacks, which means intrusive thoughts. All of a sudden you're having memories, or you might be having a whole series of dysregulating sensations in your body. And I want you to imagine you're at a workplace where you're doing a meditation practice. And you go into the class and you're asked to pay attention to sensations that feel actually quite overwhelming for you. But you want to be, everyone in the workplace is doing it. So it feels like, well, I better actually, try this at least. So you try it and you find, oh my gosh, I pay attention to my body. That's actually quite overwhelming. I'm just tracking my breath. And then imagine that you go to the person who's leading it and the person says, oh, that's fine. Just keep doing it. Yeah, I'm being a little dramatic about that. But that's partly that's the main headline of what I want to be talking to you about today is that mindfulness-based practices can really help people struggling with trauma, and it can actually cause difficulty for people struggling with trauma. So my goal here is just to give you that headline up front and have you raise the consciousness of everyone, especially if this is new for you, to just be aware of different modifications that you can make to support people who might be struggling inside of the work. Is that making sense so far? Okay, cool. Oh, let's see if I hit the right button here. There's a laser and okay, good. So let me give you 2 minutes on me to tell you how it'll contextualize a little bit. Can I just get a show of hands? How many people know my work? Wow. Thanks. That's amazing. And for those of you that don't know, that's great too. That's really exciting. Thanks for being here. So, okay, long story short, I was a serious meditator, had an experience on a retreat that was really dysregulating for me, kept going to my teacher, and my teacher basically kept saying, just take it back to the cushion, take it back to practice. Ended up coming back from this retreat, and a number of the friends that I trust said, can I be honest with you? You don't seem like you're doing so well. These meditation retreats you go on, it seems like you're coming back a little bit worse for wear. Have you thought about trauma? And I hadn't, and I'm not someone who would actually ascribe trauma to my personal history. Ended up doing work around trauma and ended up doing a dissertation on mindfulness and trauma. And it was recorded on video, which was super awkward. So someone brought an old video camera, and this is it on the side. I don't know if you can see, but my shirt was untucked, and my dad still is mad at me about the fact that I didn't tuck in my shirt for the defense. But anyway, I pulled it off, I got through it, and here's what happened. The dissertation defense went viral. And I'll say that in air quotes because as much as a dissertation defense on meditation and trauma could go viral, but you got out there, it made the rounds, and here's what happened. And this is how I got here to all of you, to talking to all of you. I started to get emails. I started to get correspondence from people who saw the video, who said, I'm someone who I had a traumatic experience. I had a hard time inside of my meditation practice. Can I talk to you about it? So that's what happened. So I talked for 3 years. I just kept getting these emails. I talked to people. I ended up talking to a lot of different meditation teachers. And eventually I had a critique about meditation. And I thought, I knew that the meditation teachers that I loved, that I respected, I knew that they knew what trauma was. I was less convinced that they knew how to work with it skillfully inside of meditation. So eventually a couple of teachers and friends, they said, I know you have a critique. Why don't you tell us what to do? So that's what I did. So this is the book on the right here. It's called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. It came out a year and a half ago. Thanks. Wow. That's sweet. So this has been a whole new world. And basically the book is a list of best practices for those of us that are asking people to feel. That's really what it is at a core level. For those of you that are asking people through, even if it's a 5-minute guided meditation, what are the practices you can be in if someone came to you and they said, I'm having flashbacks, or I'm really stressed out, I'm having a traumatic memory, can I talk to you about it? I'm trying to empower folks inside of any environment, whether that's a workplace, whether that's a meditation center, to have those tools. So that's what I'm up to. I won't have a ton of time to go through much of it today, but I want to give you at least some headlines, and then we'll do a practice before we end here. So I'd like to define trauma. Seems like a place to start. So do folks know Pat Ogden? She's great. She's does this work around sensory motor psychotherapy. This is Pat Ogden's definition. It's an event or series of events that's stressful enough to leave us feeling helpless, terrified, and profoundly unsafe. So there's a spectrum of trauma. We all experience stress. Then there's traumatic stress, which tends to be life-threatening experiences. And then there's post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which you will have heard about. So there's a whole spectrum of trauma. And we could pause here we can't, but if we could, we would pause here, and I think we could have a whole 2-hour conversation about how we define trauma. Because this is a very interesting point about the mainstream definitions of trauma really steer us towards whose pain do we legitimize and whose pain do we not. Which groups of people will we actually see pain, which will we not? For those that are interested, it wasn't until actually quite recently that sexual violence was a part of post-traumatic stress disorder. That wasn't until actually a more recent edition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and that came from really powerful feminist organizing that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to actually get that in the DSM. So there's a whole big conversation about what we mean by trauma, and I'm just going to say right now, this is the most intense experience of stress that we can experience. And then I'll define trauma sensitive for you. It might be a new term, trauma sensitive or trauma informed. Here's a 4R definition. So I'd propose that if you all walked out of here and said, I'm going to say I'm a trauma sensitive mindfulness practitioner or teacher, here are 4 R's and kind of benchmarks. 1, you've done work to realize how widespread trauma is. 2nd, you can recognize trauma symptoms. 3rd, you can respond effectively. And the 4th is actually avoiding retraumatization. And I'm trying to speak to you all for the 300 to 400 people that I've been talking to over the last 5 years. They're the ones who they said, these practices didn't work for me, but I didn't say anything because I was embarrassed. So I'm really here to try to be a voice of, there might be 1 or 2 people in your classes who might be falling through the cracks, and you can empower yourself to actually catch it in a workplace. You can actually see it. I won't have as much time as I want to here to get into the signs of trauma, because it takes a while for you all to be experienced. How many people in here are trauma professionals? Do you mind if I ask? We got a handful. So you've trained. It takes some training to really recognize trauma. But the 2 things you can look for is if someone's energy is extremely high or extremely low. It's something called dysregulated arousal. One of the ways this gets talked about is with trauma. You've heard of fight flight, yeah? Fight flight, our accelerator gets slammed to the floor. You've heard of freeze? Freeze is when the brake gets hit. One of the ways people talk about trauma is the accelerator and the brake get slammed to the floor, and they both stay there at the same time. Yeah. So someone who's in a class with you might be having this experience. You can imagine that internally. of the brake and the accelerator slammed at the same time, it creates a lot of different sensations, difficult sensations in the body. So what you can look for is if someone's energy is really high, they're sweating, they're really hypervigilant, it seems like it's too much. That might be a conversation to have with someone in a class, like, hey, how are you doing? Can I check in with you about how the practices are going? Or if someone's actually dissociating, checking out, they're numb, again, that might be a conversation to have with them. Please don't walk up to anyone falling asleep in a class and say you're traumatized. This is just a flag for us. And this is all I want you to take away from this talk is just the fact that you're here for this talk and you made the space, especially if this is a new topic, just to have that in the background for you is huge. That's 50% of it. If you just know, oh, mindfulness isn't a catch-all solution to stress here, you're way ahead of the game. Have you ever known the experience of like, we'll just throw mindfulness at it? We'll just see what happens, like spaghetti, and see what sticks. It's a little more complicated with trauma, right? So that's what I'm here to talk about. I want to give you a quick example. I got to go to a trauma-sensitive yoga class. Has anyone been in trauma-sensitive yoga class? Cool. It was brand new for me, totally new. So I thought, well, I'm into trauma-sensitive mindfulness meditation. Let me go to a trauma-sensitive yoga class, which is it's more popular. And at the entrance to the trauma-sensitive yoga class, there was 2 buckets of chips. There was one, so you know how in yoga, they sometimes offer you assists? They physically move you sometimes. So a trauma-sensitive practice that you wouldn't want to be actually touching someone without their permission. Yeah. So if someone's experienced some form of traumatic stress, especially if their body was violated in any way, asking their permission and consent to touch them would be a good idea, yeah? In yoga, they were trying to figure, okay, what can we do with this? So they put these chips out, and these chips, one of them says, basically, yes, please. You're welcome to offer me an assist. And the other chips say, no, thank you. And what you do is you take these chips and you put them at the front of your yoga mat so that during class, the teacher knows, oh, I can offer this person an assist or I won't. I don't know about you all. I thought that was so smart. So smart. Like in what's the word? Not intuitive, not ingenious. Innovative. It was innovative. It was like, oh, wow, we got to think about this. So here's an example where you leave someone who's taking a yoga class, you're leaving them in choice about whether they want to be touched, and then you're letting them communicate that to the teacher. So I'm interested in these kind of practices with meditation. So in the book, there's 64 different practices that we can all learn to help us basically move towards this, where we're leaving people in choice. So let me give you, where are we? Okay, well, I'll give you a couple of examples and then we're going to do a practice to finish off. One teacher that I learned from, her name's Babette Rothschild. She's a trauma expert in LA. And she says, whenever you're working with trauma, you want to make sure people know how to hit the brakes. So she was the first teenager in her small town who got a car, and her friends would be like, please teach me how to drive. So whenever they go to the parking lot, she said, the first thing that I made sure is that they knew where the brakes are, right? That's always the first important thing. So she's saying when we're working with trauma, because of that thing I said about accelerator and the brakes, we want to make sure people know how to modulate the intensity of their meditation practice. So again, imagine back to that story I told you. You're someone who's in a class. When you pay attention to your body, it feels overwhelming. So what are the actual modifications that you could do that would actually help modulate the intensity of practice? I've met people who said, I didn't know that I could just open my eyes. I got caught inside of practice and I just didn't know. So here's a couple of examples of ways that you can help people apply the brakes. One would be just to open eyes. So to give people the choice, hey, I just want you to know during this 10-minute sit, if you want to have your eyes open, that's fine. Just that one line up front, leaving people in choice. Second would be taking structured breaks. Long-term meditation practice is not always indicative for people that are struggling with trauma. So we tried to do it here. They've been having physical, we're stretching, we're taking breaks. But ideally having breaks every 15, 30 minutes, giving people a minute can be really helpful. Slow, deep breaths. can also be very helpful. Not always, though. For some people, paying more attention to the breath can actually be really evocative. But you could ask someone, hey, if it's useful right now for you to open your eyes and take 4 breaths, you're welcome to do that. Again, these are just options that we get to build in to meditation practice. It's like in our toolkit in the back, yeah? Couple more. A lot of people find making some form of self-contact to also be really helpful. So during practice, they find themselves dissociated, they find themselves overwhelmed. Just knowing they can place their hand on their heart, it can be really grounding for some people. Last one is changing posture. Have you ever been in a meditation class where you're like, I want to stand up, but I don't know if I can right now? I'm going to bug everyone. But if you're in a class where you say, look, if you want to stand up during the practice, that's okay. You get to build the ground rules into your practice. Give people the option of posture. You could sit, you could lie down, or you could stand. One caveat is if you fall asleep, we might rock you if you start to snore. It's good to let people know that you're just going to give a gentle tap to the leg. This is a short list, but I wanted to give you just a little sense of some of the different modifications that you can learn so that, again, just so you have that in the backdrop for you if someone needs help. I want to finish with the practice because I just talked to you about what trauma-sensitive practice is, and I want to give you an embodied experience of it. So if you could have both this is an optional practice, but I'd like you to have both of your hands free for this practice. This is going to be a short, about 3-minute practice. When we're working with trauma, we're often working with some of the deepest survival strategies that we have as humans. And one of the things that we learn working with trauma is even though you might know you're safe, your body might tell you otherwise. So I want to give you an experiential practice about what it is to be trauma sensitive, how it is that we can support, respect, and give autonomy to people that are experiencing trauma. So with one hand, I'd like you to make a fist. You can do it in your lap. And I'd like you to imagine that the job of this fist is to stay closed. And in staying closed, this fist is taking care of your safety. That's its job. So by staying closed, it's keeping you safe. And then with the other hand, I'd like you to spend 10 or 15 seconds trying to pry open the fist. Yeah, so you can actually go for it. And I want you to get that felt experience of trying to open the fist that's trying to stay closed to take care of your safety. Okay, you can let that go. If you want, you can shake it out a little bit. Okay, part 2 of the practice. This is the last part. I'd like you to do the same thing. I'd like you to make a fist. Again, same idea, taking care of your safety. And then with the other hand, this is going to be tricky to do. I'm just going to talk. So with the other hand, I'd like you to try placing it beneath the fist. And in doing that, I want you to see if you can communicate basically, good job. Like what you're doing right now is so smart. Of course you're doing that. That's so intelligent. Just stay there for a sec. And then as you're doing that, you're also communicating, I don't have an agenda to open you. I'm just here and I'm with you. And for this last part, if you want, you could even support the fist to close. Does that make sense? So you could actually just let it know, hey, that's cool this close. I'm here to support you to do that. Okay, and you can let that go. I'm going to invite you to just turn to a neighbor, maybe someone you don't know. Please just have a brief sharing about how was that practice, and then we'll come back and we'll close. Thanks all. So I wanted to do that practice. I mean, I'd love to just actually head around right now and hear how that was for people. But I wanted to do that practice to give you a sense of that's what I'd say is a trauma-sensitive embodiment. If someone comes in, however we're supporting people and they say, here's what's happening for me, that we say, no problem. That on some level, that's not a problem, what's happening. I'm going to finish with a quick story about this. So I was in a meditation class. It was one of those weekly classes. It was in, I'm from Toronto, but it was in Berkeley. And someone in the class, we finished the meditation, and they said, we were just doing a quick check on how it was, and they said, I want to get the F out of here. I just want out of here. And the whole class, it was a small class, and everyone just kind of got quiet. And we looked to the teacher, and the teacher said, cool, how far do you want to go? And the whole class was like, whoa, that was a different response. And the person said, they could tell they were surprised, and they sat with it, and they said, I want to go to the top of that hill. And the teacher said, cool, you want to go? Why don't, if you go, can you just take a buddy with you? And it was this moment, it was a little like, what's going to happen next? And someone said, I'll go with you. And so the person went out from the class, and they ended up doing wind sprints up and down this hill. And they came back, and I will never forget it. Like the look on, they had been running, so they were pretty alive. But the look on their face, they just came back and they said, thank you. Like, thank you for trusting what my body wanted to do. And then they just, for the next 5 weeks, their practice really shifted and changed. And the thing I wanted to point out with that story, two things. One is, to me, that really embodied the hand fist. It was like, no problem. The other thing I saw is that the person in leadership didn't take it personal. They didn't say, gosh, they don't like my practice or my teaching. Actually, they just said, there's something intelligent here. Let me follow it, and let's do this in a safe way. So they said, go with someone, but they trusted it. That's the essence of trauma-sensitive practice with this. Mindfulness is amazing, so powerful. And then there's particular trauma modifications, I'd say, that can make it even more powerful, especially for people struggling with trauma, which is many people. So I'll leave you with that story. I'm going to be around if you want to chat more about it. And we're doing a practice, I think in 15 or 30 minutes, we'll do a little bit more trauma-sensitive practice. But thanks all. It's really great to see your faces. Yeah, see you again.